You're watching The Legal Breakdown. So, Glenn, we have a recording between a Trump campaign official and a Fox News producer wherein the Trump folks admit that the Dominion machines were checked. Here's a quick clip.
If we could just go off the record for 1 sec here.
Yeah, sure, of course. I don't want us to say it if it's not. That's why we're checking.
I think they have looked at the machines. When the Secretary of State did its audit, there was I think a fair bit of looking at the machines. The audit came in pretty darn close to what the machine count was with the receipts. So, I don't know the outcome of those, but our understanding, again, this is from the Secretary of State's office, was that there weren't any physical issues with machines on those inspections.
Glenn, how bad is this for Fox in the upcoming Dominion lawsuit? And does that bad news extend to Trump at all?
Yeah, for Fox, it's going from bad to worse. It really does feel like, with all of this evidence showing that Fox was not only reckless in its broadcasting, but it was just intentionally broadcasting false information. And there are any number of recorded conversations that support that conclusion. It really does feel like liability is a lock. Usually it's a very high bar to prove actual malice, but it feels like Dominion has already surpassed that bar. And the question is really going to become, what are Dominion's damages? So, for example, can they prove that they really suffered $1.6 billion in damage to its business, in reputational harm, in its ability to do business in the future? And you also ask, does this touch the Trump campaign or Donald Trump himself? You bet it does, because when you have Trump campaign officials admitting that they didn't have any evidence of fraud in the Georgia election as a result of the Dominion voting machines, we heard reporting that Jack Smith has expanded his probe into Donald Trump and Trump's criminal associates for the crime of wire fraud. And I think this recording plays into that. So wire fraud, simply put, is when somebody sends out an email with false information intending to dupe or deceive the recipient of that email into sending money. That pretty much sums up much of what Donald Trump was doing from November 3rd after he lost the election until he left office on January 20th. So these kind of recordings are going to become invaluable to Special Counsel Jack Smith in helping prove that indeed Donald Trump and his criminal associates were engaged in wire fraud. So this is a win-win for the American people, because it's really bad for Fox and it's really bad for Donald Trump.
One case that you didn't mention here was the Fulton County case. How does this factor into that? Because, I mean, that whole case was predicated on this idea that Trump had already won in Georgia, and that the Secretary of State, for that reason, had to just find these votes to compensate for the fact that he already won. And yet we know, based on this recording here, that they knew the machines were operating totally fine. And so how would that factor in to the Fulton County case, where we're waiting on, what Fani Willis mentioned would be an imminent decision as to whether or not she'd indict?
Yeah, this adds to the mountain of evidence that proves Donald Trump and his associates had absolutely no legitimate claim, no evidence supporting this notion that there were any irregularities in the Georgia state election. So it continues to put the lie to Donald Trump's, corrupt ask of Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, find me 11,780 votes. Recordings like this prove that there were no votes to be found. This was Donald Trump in sort of a naked ask to corruptly alter the vote count. That's what he was doing. And I think this helps prove that. And don't forget, even the Georgia special grand jury reached a finding, a conclusion that there was no widespread election fraud undermining the Georgia state election results. But listen, every little bit counts when you're trying to prove a case beyond a reasonable doubt, which will be Fani Willis's burden in the criminal prosecution in Georgia, or by a simple preponderance of the evidence, which will be Dominion's burden of proof in trying to prove that Fox defamed them.
And do you believe that we've already exceeded those burdens in both the Dominion case and Fani Willis's case?
So much so that I've maintained for a very long time that a novice prosecutor could walk into court with even just the evidence that is available courtesy of public reporting, and prove Donald Trump guilty in his or her sleep. One thing I think I'm pretty adept at, after 30 years, I should be adept at it, it's assessing the quality and quantity of incriminating evidence when deciding whether to bring a charge against somebody. Donald Trump could be convicted 10 times over, and I have long maintained the only thing standing between Donald Trump and a criminal conviction is an indictment.
Going back to Fox for a moment here, if Fox is on record now, thanks to this recording, having gotten inside knowledge from the Trump campaign itself that the Dominion stuff was all bullshit, along with the other admissions that we've already seen, thanks to those text messages because of discovery in the Dominion lawsuit, that those hosts and executives also knew that all this, fake Dominion stuff was also bullshit. Does Fox have any viable defense here?
None that I can see. Really, I think their best play right now would be to try to attack Dominion's valuation of the damage Dominion suffered as a result of Fox's defamation. I mean, I don't know what Dominion was worth. I don't know what its future earning capacity is, but $1.6 billion, that's a huge chunk of change, and they will have to prove damages. You can't just throw a number out, even if you win on the liability front. You can easily prove Fox defamed Dominion voting systems. You still need to prove the amount of damage you suffered. I happen to believe that's where Fox should be focusing all its attention, because when it comes to liability, when it comes to the question of whether or not they defamed Dominion voting systems, they're dead in the water.
Glenn, a lot of the rumblings are that Dominion would probably look to settle, and they'd probably do quite well. What reason would Dominion have for actually going to trial and seeing this thing out until the end?
There is actually a public service to be done by exposing the Fox network for what it is: a disinformation network, a propaganda network, a network that was all consumed with money and not at all interested in the truth or falsity of what they were broadcasting. So I applaud Dominion for wanting to make sure all of this dirty evidence of Fox's business practices, gets aired in the public square, because I also happen to believe that this will probably inspire more people to consider bringing defamation suits against Fox. And at the end of the day, it may eventually spell the end of the Fox network if they can't weather the financial storm.
But do you think that Dominion has any vested interest in doing anything other than just making some money for themselves? Like, do you think that they have a duty to the people of America for exposing a propaganda network? Do you think that their priority here is just making money from this lawsuit? Because I say that knowing that that they are just a business, and their priority should just be making money. But at the same time, Fox did really screw them over by virtue of what they've done. So do you think that there's a bit of like a hope for revenge in all of this?
Yeah, payback is a what, right? Yeah. So listen, businesses, companies, corporations, partnerships, they can have a social conscience, and many of them do, some of them don't. And, I don't know if that's what's motivating Dominion to insist on going to trial rather than settling, because I have to believe Fox would be willing to entertain a pretty high settlement offer to get out from under this lawsuit. But for whatever the motivation is, I applaud Dominion for kind of going to the mat over this.
Yeah. Now, you touched on this earlier, but I'm especially interested in this point on defamation. Dominion still does have an extraordinarily high bar to prove actual malice on Fox's part. Does this unearthed recording help that case? And do you think that Dominion has all of the elements necessary to reach that bar?
I do. You have to prove that they have had knowledge that what they were broadcasting was false, not that they were just recklessly ignoring the probable falsity of it, but they actually knew what they were broadcasting was false. And that has been shown over and over and over again. And
including with this clip right here.
This clip helps. There's no doubt. Anytime you try a case, there is rarely one blockbuster piece of evidence or one smoking gun. Believe me, prosecutors are always looking for it, and we rarely find it. But trying a case is like assembling a puzzle where no one piece of the puzzle will tell you, what picture will emerge once it's all assembled. But, this is a really big, important piece of the puzzle. But it just feels like we are well beyond malice based on what we've seen of Fox's complete disregard, intentional disregard for the truth of what they were broadcasting.
Is the fact that this, based on what you're saying, would seem like such a home run, is that why Dominion doesn't really have a vested interest in just settling when they probably could just win the case if it goes to trial?
It may be, but let's remember, there have probably been some behind-the-scenes discussions between Dominion's lawyers and Fox lawyers. It wouldn't surprise me at all if there were some numbers tentatively discussed in the event the case settled out. Maybe those conversations broke down. Maybe Dominion realized, Fox is going to be unwilling to give us anything near what, the damages that we think we suffered. So we're done talking. Let's go to trial.
Well, from your lips to God's ears. Glenn, do we have any update on what the timeline for any of this might be?
Yeah, interestingly, this recent revelation, this tape recording, may actually push things down the road a little bit because the judge has decided to sanction Fox. And one of those sanctions involve allowing Dominion to conduct more depositions of Fox employees and officers, and Fox has to foot the entire bill for it, as opposed to the parties splitting the bill, which would be more usual. So, the fact that these revelations are now coming out may actually kick the trial can down the road a little bit.
Yeah, I think this is one of those rare instances where we're actually content to have a little bit of a delay here. So with that said, we'll keep an eye on this trial in particular, along with everything else going on in legal news. For those watching, if you want to keep up with this stuff, make sure to subscribe. The links are right here on the screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.